session, I'd like to invite on stage Rahul Kanwal, News Director, India Today Television and Aaj Tak, Executive Director, Business Today, Siddharth Zarabi, Editor, Business Today, Sahil Joshi, Managing Editor, Aaj Tak Mumbai Bureau, and I will also be joining them in moderating this session.
Hello and a very warm welcome to this India Today, Business Today, post-budget roundtable. We're absolutely delighted to have the record-setting Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman ji, with us. And for more than a decade, the middle class has been amongst the staunchest supporters of the Modi Sarkar. And after each budget, and Nirmala ji has been on a few of these editor roundtables in the past, she's been asked by audiences sitting here, ki middle class ko kya mila? Hame kya diya? Now she has an answer to that, and naturally the budget has been receiving a lot of acclaim from those who've benefited. But over the next 45 minutes, we hope to discuss with the Finance Minister the state of the economy, because not just our domestic factors at play, you've got a lot of international headwinds in the form of President Donald Trump and all the uncertainty around tariffs that his policies potentially could unleash. Madam, welcome. Is this the best response you've had? Have you been sleeping better post-budget than in any of your past 8 budgets? Chain ki neend?
Well, I've always slept well.
Is the quality of sleep better?
I've slept as I would do every other year.
Is the incentive and the tax op given for taxpayers at one level an admission by the Modi government that urban consumption in particular was not growing fast, and therefore some kind of a brahmastra had to be pulled out to ensure that there is some comfort and some balm for the taxpayer? Is it born out of distress, this SOP that you've come out with?
No. In the last 3 or 4 years, we have continuously engaged with taxpayers, and in order that their trust is intact in the government, we have taken several steps. Faceless assessment is one. Taxpayers' charter, which we released in the budget, 21 if I remember correct, was the other. Faceless appeal, Vivad se Vishwas, sending certificates to prompt taxpayers, timely taxpayers, highest taxpayers, by-region taxpayers, even that. So in every budget you've had clear steps taken towards giving that sense that we respect taxpayers. And this one is in a continuation of that. I don't deny that this is going to have a collateral in consumption, in savings, and if you're confining your question only to urban, after all, taxpayers are all over the country, not just in urban areas. So this is a continuing part of Prime Minister Modi's effort to respect the service that taxpayers are doing in nation building.
Are you hoping that the highest ROI will be in the Delhi elections?
That's for y'all
Maximum
to
return
assess.
on every rupee left on the table in the Delhi elections. Is that part of the idea?
You should tell us about it.
But is it about the timing of the announcement?
The
Because-
budget is on 1st February
No,
every
that-
year.
That's correct. But it's also about, what Rahul asked, that ROI is going to be in the Delhi elections. So a lot of people are saying, specifically the political opponents, Arvind Kejriwal made a public demand that the tax slab should be raised to 10 lakh, and then you had a 12 lakh rupees, and then there were a lot of memes on the social media. So is it about the timing? Looking at, a lot of people are saying that it is because of the Delhi elections the government was forced to make such kind of an announcement.
No, I have answered in the first step itself that this is a continuous process. And every effort that Prime Minister puts to convey the message we respect taxpayer finds a place in the next coming budget, and so on.
Finance Minister, since you speak about a continuous process, please allow me to take the discussion beyond direct tax, where clearly we now have 70% roughly of PIT taxpayers out of the tax net, which is a very significant number. Post this, do you think the onus shifts to the GST Council to reform and give us a GST 3.0 for NDA 3.0 with some of the anomalies that have been spoken about. The center has recognized them. You have reflected upon them in the past. Should the action now shift to indirect tax reform?
First, let me ask, what is GST 2.0 then, if this is going to be 3.0? I didn't know there was a 2.0. Okay. To be fair to the GST and the ministers who are all in the council, the work on rationalizing and simplifying GST rates had already commenced. In fact, it had commenced nearly 3 years ago. Then the scope was widened. Then newer ministers came in after some states went through election and they had different ministers join in. And now the work is almost complete.
सर क्रिप्टो में इन्वेस्ट करके दोस्त की लाइफ सेट हो गई पर मेरे अंदर कॉन्फिडेंस ही नहीं है हेल्प मी
कॉन्फिडेंस चाहिए
हाँ
कॉन्फिडेंस चाहिए
हाँ
कॉन्फिडेंस चाहिए You have to
Say, I need to have a bit more in-depth looking at it, because whilst reducing the items or reducing the rate of items which are in common man's list every day for a everyday consumption, for me it was also important that we don't lose an opportunity that we can even bring down the number of rates, which was also the original intent, that we wanted fewer rates and lower rates. So work has got to happen on that, and I hope the GST Council will decide on it sooner.
Are you confident that you're close to some kind of consensus in the GST Council, and what are the key reforms? Because if you ask people sitting here, there's a sense that we pay too much tax, indirect taxes through GST, and this has gone overboard. So what's your message to those watching?
It's not gone overboard, Rahul. I keep giving the data to you. Every item has been scrutinized by the GST Council. You may not hear the state finance ministers coming to the media to speak in favor of, on behalf of GST Council. But that doesn't mean that there is a discordant note. Consensus prevails on every decision in the GST Council. With that said, data is released of how, even if on an average, if an item under the GST, goods or service, is taxed as at, let us say, 15.23%, you will still be lesser than the pre-GST and revenue neutral. You wouldn't be earning more than what you earned before, nor would you be charging more than what you charged before the GST was introduced. I could still be at 15. But what is it today? On an average across the board, goods and service, 11.23. What does it simply mean? That goods and services are taxed lesser than what they can be ideally. Where is 15.23 and where is 11 point something? That's the rate at which GST is taxing items. And every now and then I put a list of items which are used by common man on an everyday basis to say how they have become less expensive. At least the rates are less expensive, or rates are lesser than what they were prior to GST. So this word of mouth game which goes about GST, oh GST has become, oh GST, no. GST has actually reduced the rate of goods much better than what it was before the introduction of GST. And I actually challenge, even if there is one item where it has become more expensive than pre-GST, not one has become.
Fair point, ma'am. Circling back to the direct taxes, I wanted to understand on both the old tax regime as well as the new tax regime. You've added many sweeteners this time around in the new tax regime, and beyond the tax bonanza that you've given, up to 12 lakh rupees of income. I want to understand the thought behind it. Are you planning to make the new tax regime so sweet that the entire tax-paying population shifts to the new tax regime? And are you planning to phase out and announce a sunset of the old tax regime, ma'am? Will that happen automatically? You will keep on increasing sweeteners, or will you be formally announcing the end of it?
I want India's tax system on the whole to be simple for compliance reasons, for the rates that are levied on people, and therefore it's not as if I'm going to sweeten the new regime but keep the old regime going only because in spite. No. The system as a whole has to be simplified. And that is why we are bringing the new Income Tax Act, which will replace the old one, which has been there since 1961, which has had so many additions to it. The original intent of the law and those additions which have come in. I'm not saying the additions are violative or in contradiction of the original intent, but they have been added and added as India was going through changes as well. 1961, 72, 73, 75, there were additions, even before and after. 91 and after, there were changes made, additions made. So the language, the tightness with which it has to be done, and also the loose ends which are here and there, are all being tampered or tinkered with at different times. So actually it's become such a tome, so bulky. Anyone who has to comply has to look at, page here, page there, and so on. So what this new act is going to do is to simplify it all, make it just straightforward. There is no interpretative confusion. Courts don't have to spend time interpreting them. They're done with that kind of a intent.
क्या इसी सेशन में पास होगा?
नहीं, पास इसी सेशन में होना तो अच्छा है अगर होता तो, बट हम तो उसको तुरंत इंट्रोड्यूस करने के बाद we want to send it to the standing committee so that the committee can spend time on it, and if they return it by the time the next session starts of the budget session, next half, we'll be happy to take it.
Finance Minister, I wanted to move beyond taxes.
And to that specific question, is the old tax regime?
Yes.
No, as long as there are people there wanting to enjoy the exemptions that they've taken, let them. I don't have any proposal to shut it down tomorrow.
Okay.
Thanks for that important point. I wanted to move beyond this into another key announcement that actually originated in last year's budget, which was the new employment generation scheme. 10,000 crore was allotted last year. In the revised estimates, we see around 6,800 crore has been spent. But this year, the jump is to 20,000 crore. So two parts to the question. How confident are you that this scheme is going to work? Because initially we noticed that the takeoff was not that smooth or that fast as you might have expected. What outcomes will this 20,000 crore yield in terms of the new employment generation scheme?
Well, there were total of 5 schemes announced in the July budget. And between July and February now, you're hardly talking about 5-6 months. Most schemes, inclusive of the internship scheme on which there was a question today in Parliament in Rajya Sabha, have all picked up very well. Now, it's a question of making people aware that this scheme is running, it has this objective, people can happily come and enroll. It is rolling on and we need to have more awareness on them.
Ma'am, the linchpin of the last couple of Sitharaman budgets has been augmentation of government spends through capacity expansion. This year, that process seems to have paused at levels which you allocated last year, and you couldn't spend what you'd allocated. So question number 1, why could the government not spend the entire amount which was allocated for capacity expansion? Are there constraints in terms of the ability of the Indian state at the center and at the state to actually go out and spend? Is that why you haven't increased allocation? Secondly, you've left 1 lakh crore rupees on the table for the taxpayer. Many economists would argue, and you've mentioned this in the past, that the maximum multiplier is for spends on infrastructure, spends on capacity expansion. Therefore, if we are to find spurs for growth, would that not have been the best route to go? Or do you feel that that route has now reached a saturation?
That continues. Our capex numbers have not come down, despite what Rahul would want to tell you. 11.11 lakh crores has gone up to 11.21 lakh crores.
But the actual spending is lesser, man. actual spending is lesser.
Yes, it was
It's
an
not yet
election.
met
That's the
the-
question he's asked, right?
Yeah.
That's the question Rahul is asking. It was an election year. Entire first quarter, and even, I would say, the part of second quarter, it was still just beginning to happen. And an amount like that to be spent between center and state does take time. And we'll probably catch up with a better number in the fourth quarter this time, before 31st March. But reasons are obvious, and therefore all of us to see. Elections did slow down your capital expenditure, but we have not cut it down. On the contrary, it's 10% more than the RE.
बट मैम क्या यही वजह है कि जिसके वजह से आपने जो स्कीम्स इसके पहले डिक्लेयर की थी, जैसे पोषण है, जल जीवन मिशन है, प्रधानमंत्री ग्राम सड़क योजना है, क्रॉप इंश्योरेंस स्कीम है, या फिर आपके स्किल इंडिया के प्रोग्राम्स हैं, उसके लिए जो एस्टिमेटेड बजट था और जो एक्चुअल स्पेंड है उसमें जो फर्क नजर आता है, वो क्या इसी के वजह से जिसका आपने रीजन दिया?
बिल्कुल इसी की वजह से ही, क्योंकि पोषण डिस्ट्रिक्ट एंड स्टेट लेवल में जो काम को होना है, वो होने के लिए हर administration was involved in the election, and therefore there could have been some slowdown there. But our allocations have not been cut down.
But on the question of saturation, do you feel, because there's only a certain amount of roadways that can be built, you can build again in a 10-year cycle. The question of the absorptive capacity of the Indian economy to deal with capex, and you've been raising the concern about India Inc. not doing enough to invest back in the India story, despite your significant reductions in corporate taxes. We've seen, ma'am, that according to a FICCI study, in the past 4 years, corporate profits for Nifty 500 companies have gone up 400%, but salaries for those sitting here watching you haven't kept pace. As finance minister, how much of a concern is that for you, and how are you trying to change that?
As regards your first question, Rahul, which are those big ministries which have huge capex? We have not reduced anything. In fact, on the contrary, have increased the allocation. Railways, roadways, that is the highways, defense, home, they are all creating assets, and they are big spenders on that. Home, because you see the vibrant villages in the border roads. Defense has its own set of asset building. Railways and roadways have not even exhausted 50% of all their large plan. So this narrative that there isn't enough absorption capacity is completely wrong. There's enough and more work to do on capital expenditure, at least in these 4 ministries, and they're big ticket spenders. So that's very clear. But if you're talking about private sector, in our engagement with the private sector, we've also highlighted the fact that many of them are probably sitting with passive investments, where they have invested it and earning interest out of it. They can always look at newer capacity building, but they are making a commercial decision as to when the market would be ready for their additional investment. After a point, I cannot speak to them about it.
Ma'am, you're talking about this 1 lakh crore rupees, which is now additional in the hands of people. How significant is it and meaningful is it when it comes to moving the needle in the economy and boosting consumption? And how soon are we going to see an impact in the economy of that?
Well, it's got to be only from 1st April, subject to the bill getting passed. I wouldn't put a number about how much is going to be spent and how much is going to be saved. It's going to be split between the two. And the popular narrative that fast-moving capital goods or consumer goods are not being purchased as much as before should see an audience, should see a opening. And as you go, discretionary spending can also increase, buying the next best car that you want to own. And also looking at the various ways in saving and investments in the various instruments that are available can also see some change. Banks probably will have better deposit now with them.
Since we are talking about growth, how critical is the global impetus to India's growth? We are seeing what is happening in the United States. You have dealt with the commerce and industry portfolio as well, and we've seen with the first round of tariff impositions by the United States, global markets have reacted. There are worries that we might see once again a supply side shock and global growth going down. Is that the most critical factor to watch out for as far as India's economy is concerned?
It's something which you anyway will have to watch. You can't speculate on it even though you're watching it. We'll have to wait and see what kind of action is going to come at all, if at all it comes. But I would at this time prepare myself for two things. One, the fallout of actions already announced on China or Canada or Mexico, although some of them, for instance, the Mexican one is going to be deferred for a month. We'll have to see what that is going to impact India indirectly, Indian markets indirectly, for which of course we are keeping a watch and also being prepared in some ways. But what exactly is going to be the direct action on India is something which I can't speculate on.
Did you have the threat of President Trump at the back of your head? Your finance secretary was quoted as saying, we want to signal India is not tariff king. Now, the guy who says India is tariff king is Donald Trump. So in some senses, by reducing customs on big motorcycles, etc., and the changes in the nuclear law, is it in some ways a message to the new American president, India wants to be friends, we don't want to be on your wrong side?
Well, on the customs duty again, 2022 budget, I said, India cannot afford to be high on tariffs. But even as we are wanting our small and medium sector industries to grow, MSMEs to grow, and MSMEs are contributing, particularly for engineering exports, nearly 40% of all our exports. If they need to import critical minerals, which we don't have in this country, and if they need some intermediary products which we cannot produce in this country, I need to look at the ways in which the basic customs duty is burdening them, and I need to remove it. Also, there was a lot of evergreening of duties. Anti-dumping duty imposed 30 years ago, 25 years ago, are being repeated. Even if we have had capacities within the country and we don't anymore need that kind of protection. So from 22, we are actually doing this exercise, and in this budget, I've clearly announced that 8 were already removed, 7 I am removing this budget, and only 8 more are pending. The rationalization has been happening since 22. It is one thing again for not just one administration, the US, even the World Trade Organization, any other developed country which wants to have some trade market access to India, always quotes your tariffs are too high. And we also have a sort of conflicting situation where you've got an FTA with some countries, and because of the FTA, you have duty-free import of the same commodity on which you've levied a huge BCD. So preventing other countries from exporting into India, whereas with the FTA countries for the same thing, you're allowing duty-free imports. So most of these smart developed countries would route it through the FTA country, and we're only telling ourselves how we've got this protection wall. So we had to clean up all this, and that's what has happened in this budget. You can read it whichever way you want.
Which is a good thing. I mean, less protect, but it's also very complex in the current scenario with President Trump doing what he is. Madam Finance Minister, I want to engage with you on your understanding of the nature of the slowdown that we've seen in the Indian economy. In the second quarter of this fiscal, we saw growth slip to 5.4%. Now, the government has been saying that this is not structural, this is short-term, it is cyclical, and from Q3, Q4, you see an uptick. My question then is, your chief economic advisor has set a target for next year's growth between 6.3 and 6.8%. If the government's core conviction is that the slowdown in growth is just temporary, why is the growth target for next year so moderate? If you actually believe this is temporary, shouldn't this be more than 7% at least? Why are you being conservative? Secondly, Prime Minister Modi's ambition of turning India into Viksit Bharat by 2047 requires real GDP growth of more than 8%. If we are 150 basis points less than where we should be in terms of achieving our target of Viksit Bharat, do you then run the risk of this ending up potentially as just another election jumla?
First of all, I think if you're only constantly looking at within India, economic survey, your assessment, and won't we need 8%? Yes, you can always point out as though it is a ceteris paribus otherwise. It's a lab-like situation. No, you're dealing with an ever-changing global scenario. Containers are not available. Oil's export is now going to be speculated upon. You have also Middle East oil coming back. You have America probably going into shale. The relationship between Canada and US. Russia getting more sanctioned. These are also very serious matters which can have a bearing on India. Your oil imports, movement of goods, the impact of China being put under tariff and sanctions by the US, the excess capacity which is sitting in the Chinese economy, and they not finding a market in the developed countries, will they go about dumping it into India? Therefore, when you're looking at predictions, just keeping Indian factors, it's one thing. But there are things which are happening, not one, not two, several things happening simultaneously, all of which are adding to the downside risks. You need to have your numbers be realistic.
And the nature of the slowdown, Arvind Subramaniam, the former chief economic advisor, says the government's misreading the slowdown data. It's a structural slowdown. This is not temporary. It's not cyclical. His argument, and that's what I want to understand from you, his argument, his critique is this is a structural slowdown. The government is not telling citizens the truth about the nature of the actual slowdown.
Well, observers of Indian economy, I'm not undermining their importance, did give us solutions during COVID. We heard them out. We've not rejected any of their ideas. But we certainly didn't take them up for implementation. We chalked our own course. So I will do it similarly. When your fundamentals are strong and when your currency is strong opposed to all other currencies, just in relation to dollar, because of the dollar's peculiarity, we suffer. And that is not the situation just for the rupee against the dollar. It is about every currency. The Japanese yen, Korean, every currency against the US dollar has that problem. Now, if your currency is fine and fit, except for this volatility with the dollar, can it be so if your fundamentals are weak? Can it be so if it is systemic problem? He can show immense number of data and say it. I'll go through them with all earnestness. But it cannot be, India cannot be the fastest growing economy continuously for the third year, and even World Bank predicts next year too, if your systemic problems are grinding to a halt, making the fundamentals to come to a grinding halt. So I'm sorry, there can always be one or two areas on which some advice has to be given. We are willing to hear. But to press the panic button saying, oh, there is a systemic problem, it's coming to a halt. No, it's not.
But ma'am, on one hand, the government keeps talking about India being the third largest economy. But on the other hand, the per capita income is not, that the India should be boasting about. So what are your thoughts about that? You think that only talking about the third largest economy, growth of the economy, it's not enough? It's also important that the per capita income is affected by that.
I don't want to sound textbookish. I don't want to sound simplistic in my answer. A country with 140 crore people. Yes, the GDP has to grow, but within 10 years, has it grown enough to bring the per capita income of 140 crore people to match up with countries where the population is far lesser? So when we take an indicator, we should understand that we also, as much as we proudly speak about the demographic dividend that India can have because of its population,
सर क्रिप्टो में इन्वेस्ट करके दोस्त की लाइफ सेट हो गई पर मेरे अंदर कॉन्फिडेंस ही नहीं है. हेल्प मी.
कॉन्फिडेंस चाहिए?
हाँ.
कॉन्फिडेंस चाहिए?
हाँ.
कॉन्फिडेंस
that level. So you can't keep telling me, but your GDP has to grow. But why is this? They're all interlinked. So I cannot aspire to have a per capita income much better than less populous countries. These are hard realities. There's no point in me answering first question, whose linkage is with the second question differently. The answer will have to be similar to the first question's answer. They're linked issues.
Finance Minister, one of the notable things about budget formulation under your charge, you've done 8, but particularly after COVID is, despite everything, you have maintained a fiscal consolidation strategy. And we are perhaps amongst the only major economy in the world which has maintained fiscal consolidation, even as what we have seen with other countries and their inflation rates. Are you disappointed that international rating agencies, including Moody's, are perhaps not taking into account the kind of effort on fiscal discipline that Modi Sarkar has been following for so many years?
Yes, fiscal discipline, transparency, and looking futuristic towards how to manage your fiscal with a deep look at how your debt is managed. Before I go into that, I'll draw the attention of this august audience. The fiscal deficit number for the coming year, 25-26, is 4.4, because that's the glide path we had given ourselves. Under 4.5 we will reach. The much talked about capital expenditure makes up for 4.3% of our GDP. I'm sure you in the audience will immediately understand where I'm going or where I'm coming from. If my fiscal deficit at 4.4 is almost the same as my public expenditure to the GDP on capital assets. 4.3, that is. What does it say? Fiscal prudence, about which you rightly point out about Prime Minister Modi's leadership, maintaining that discipline, transparency, but also the quality of public expenditure, the quantum of it in relation to the GDP. If it's matching with your fiscal deficit, it means you're borrowing only to spend on capital expenditure, creating assets. So the deficit, which is nothing but your borrowing, is going towards capital asset creation. We are not spending money to service our loans or to pay salaries or to service or to repay the loan and so on. That itself is a major big point. I would think despite COVID, when we had to borrow money, we have soon shown you that fiscal discipline, without cutting down on any of the social welfare schemes and without cutting down on public expenditure in capital assets, now equals just that fiscal deficit number. I would think this is observers of Indian economy, whether they are credit rating agency or anybody else, should look at this. I wouldn't think anybody else other than Prime Minister Modi, with all his experience as the Chief Minister of a state like Gujarat, and now as Prime Minister, now the third term as Prime Minister, unless he is a keen watcher of the economy and guiding us on it, we would have been in a position to achieve this.
Ma'am, a quick follow-up, because you brought up states and Gujarat. Recent ranking by Niti suggests that there are certain states which are slipping when it comes to their state-level economic performance. Andhra Pradesh is mentioned, Punjab, West Bengal, Kerala. The union alone can't get India to grow. What is their responsibility? What would you say in this regard?
Well, I think this has been said at the center to state level talks one-on-one with the states. I wouldn't want to comment on it in a public platform, considering that when it comes to the question of certain national interest matters, It is not with a political motive that one speaks. India's development, India's fiscal situation, India's debt to GDP, India's effective spending on capital expenditure. These are matters for all of us to be equally worried. And I would think, honestly, the points which I'm trying to highlight to you, even in the earlier question, about indicators to a healthy Indian economy, on which Prime Minister Modi has given attention to each one of them: capital expenditure, transparency, fiscal deficit being managed well, money being spent only where it is required, and taxpayers' money being made or being used responsibly. These are principles for everybody. These are not just a BJP or Prime Minister Modi. It has to be in every state. And unfortunately, some of our states will have to introspect and get their act together.
Ma'am, I cover the stock markets for Business Today, and I have a question related to that. Most market experts are cheering the budget. They're calling it, and Nilesh Shah mentioned that you've delivered the Triveni Singam by managing the fisc, rolling out the tax cuts, as well as pushing the capex. But at the same time, retail investors are still thinking, why is it not moving the needle on the markets? There's also a bigger concern. The foreign investors have been continuously pulling out money from Indian stock markets. There's been an exodus. In January alone, $10 billion has been pulled out. Why do you think foreign investors are not getting the confidence in the Indian stock markets or in the Indian economy to put in money right now? What is your message to them, ma'am?
Well, I think India's market and its fundamentals are strong. Domestic situation and issues arising out of it alone cannot be the reason for FDIs to go out of this country. The developments in the US, the global uncertainties, markets like Japan now trying to assert themselves. So many things are happening that FDIs will move as quickly as Mercury would do. So I'm not surprised, but equally, I would want to make India a lot more attractive destination for investment, and that is one of the reasons why in the budget I have mentioned that the BIT will be reviewed and we will come up with a new bilateral investment treaty template, a model agreement with which we'll have more negotiations with countries bilaterally for attracting investment.
Ma'am, I want to understand your current thinking on crypto assets. In the past, you took a certain position, and as a result of which, 97% of trading in crypto assets done by Indians has now moved offshore. Industry estimates suggest that there's a loss to the government exchequer, at least just through TDS, to the extent of 6,000 crore rupees. And a lot of the Web3 entrepreneurs have moved to places like Dubai, UAE, where crypto regulations are more favorable. Now, this comes at a time when American President Donald Trump is openly he's got his own coins, he's openly embracing crypto assets. Is that leading to some rethink within government that did you go too far in trying to quash crypto trading and it's moved out? So Indians are still trading, but the volume of trading has shifted internationally. And are you, as a result of what's happening in the United States and elsewhere, at some level rethinking the position that you've taken on how the government looks at crypto assets?
Only because we were from the beginning saying that we are not against the distributed ledger technology, but we still want to know where the transactions are happening. We brought in the TCS on it. And then soon we followed it up during India's presidency of the G20 that there should be a global understanding on how to regulate or how to tackle the issues of trading or cryptocurrencies. We took it to the G20, in fact had a wide-ranging consultation, IMF and FSB, everybody gave their paper, and some kind of a progress has happened under the Brazilian presidency as well. So from our side, we have never discouraged the technology which runs this. But yet we were also wanting to make sure that we are aware of where this money is coming, where this money is getting traded, and who are behind some of these, not all, but some of these transactions. And that is why we had to put in a TCS on it.
No, you didn't answer my question. Are you at any level reviewing your thinking on how to regulate crypto assets because of Donald Trump being so favorable towards them? It's like a very different approach between DC and Delhi.
That's right. We are India. I'll think about India.
Well, ma'am, I want to draw your attention to the special mention of Bihar. Especially the political parties from the state I come from, and also parties in Delhi are talking about it. Why there is so much attention to Bihar suddenly? Is it also a kind of a timing we should look at, the political timing we should look at? That is number one. And number two, I would also want to understand your thoughts about suddenly there is a kind of a toolkit by the political parties that announce a particular amount of money for women, women specifically, and win the elections. Who is going to foot the bill? And that is also a rising concern. RBI has also raised certain concern with respect to that. So what are your thoughts about that as well?
I hope you're not unhappy about us giving help and assistance and development to Bihar.
It's been a long-standing demand, and
Yes.
a lot of other states are also making the similar kind of a demand.
Long-standing-
It's just about the political timing.
Any time in your 5-year calendar is a political time for any party. You do anything during any part of the 5 years for which you are elected, it shall be viewed with a political lens. And there's nothing wrong with you viewing it like that, and nothing wrong with us doing it for any state. And I would speak in favor of Bihar because, after all, every one of us have been talking about it. You're saying it's been waiting for a very long time, when Prime Minister Modi is talking about Purvoday. In fact, he restored 3 fertilizer plants all from this region. Of course, Purvanchal also included Purvanchal and UP. So to revive these states, everything that we need to do is what we are looking at. And Bihar has been waiting for one international airport worth its name now for how many years? Wouldn't you have asked the other parties as to why they didn't think for a state with such a dense population, which attracts the global Buddhist community into Bihar, doesn't even have an international airport? You wouldn't want to appreciate that? You see it with a political lens saying, oh, this year they're going for elections. Yes, they need to get it at some point in time. And above all, when we are talking about superfoods of the world, Makana goes exported from India, but nothing reaches that region or nothing reaches the people who are doing it. And who are they after all? The most extremely backward communities, EBCs. Only the fishermen of that area who are EBCs go into the ponds to collect Makana, superfood. We had a year of millets, celebrated globally, but Makana had no share in it at all. So we had to do something for the Makana board. I went myself last November, saw it. It's amazing how those people who are doing, and in fact, they are so much into so many things. Fishing, Makana, back home they'll be doing Madhubani painting. It's such a beautifully woven community of people. What's the grudge if we help them? And they're flooded every year by that river Kosi. Why not do something to stop the flood from eating away these small assets? I want to, matter of fact, ask anyone who tells me, what is this? Why are you doing to Bihar? Bihar is part of India, long waiting for development. Why would you want to grudge it?
How about the second question, ma'am?
Why would you want to grudge it?
Ma'am, the second question which I asked about the schemes, direct transfer schemes for women, almost every state.
See, I'll give you my matter of fact opinion. Give as much as you want in the name of whatever, freebie. But I won't even classify it as freebie as long as that money is accounted for in your budget. As long as it is accounted for in your budget and the assembly passes it and you have the money for it. I know of states, and you know of states, I don't want to name them here. You know of states which have given promises and won the election, and after that do everything to implement the program and then say, we are left with no money, Modi is not giving me money. You won the election, you gave the promise, Modi has got to pay for it. Out of turn. What Modi has to pay by law, with the due process of law, he is paying. But if you thought you can just pull it off like that and then keep blaming Prime Minister Modi, it's unfair. Look at the way Karnataka, the state from where I am an MP, I feel really bad. Till 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was one of the best governed states. You had industry coming, startups were living there, and it was the best ecosystem. Today, the state is revenue deficit. And every time this Chief Minister, Honorable Chief Minister of Karnataka, has been the finance minister, has presented 17 budgets, if I know right. And he tells us that you are not giving me what is Karnataka's due. And I am being pointed out saying you're a member of parliament from Karnataka and the finance minister. Oh, then every finance minister takes away from the treasury and gives to the state from where they are an MP? What?
Ma'am, but that's the advantage of having lots of elections. Each state can get some special attention. If there's only one nation, one election, then Makhanas would never have got the attention that they did. But this has been a fascinating conversation. Madam Finance Minister, the buzz in the world of cricket is about Abhishek Sharma's ton. 37 balls, he hit 100. Second fastest ton ever. The question is, has Nirmala Sitharaman done the same in the field of politics? By scoring the runs that you did on the tax field, in the battle against the Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi. We don't know yet what will happen, but you've done for the middle class what Abhishek Sharma did for India against England. So I suppose there are lots of people who are watching and are thankful for that, but we are very thankful that you took out time and joined us here. She's been called for a meeting with the Prime Minister at the time when she was originally supposed to come. So we're very anxious whether this would happen or not, but she's adjusted her schedule. So we're thankful to you, ma'am, and to your team.
Thank you very
for
much.
making the effort of joining us. Means a lot. So thank you so much. Can we have a warm round of applause for the Union Finance Minister who's on her way to becoming the Finance Minister who's presented the most amount of budgets. See, in cricket they ask, were you thinking about the century? Are you thinking about becoming the Finance Minister who's presented? Siddharth, what's the record? 11, right? 11. So you are 3 away from 11. So if you stay Finance Minister till 29, you would have broken the record.
It hasn't sunk into me. I'm just doing what I'm expected to do.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us. Thank you, ma'am.